Hello there, and welcome to Deep Earth Stories. Tonight we go somewhere most people have never thought to look. Not forward into the future, not sideways into space, but backward, deep backward, into a time so old, so quiet, so forgotten, that even the stones have stopped trying to explain it. Get comfortable, turn the lights down if you can, because what we are about to explore together has been waiting a very, very long time for someone to listen. But before that, tell me in comments where are you listening from and what time is there right now. Tonight, we are going to take a very long, very slow journey. Not a journey across a country or an ocean. Something much bigger than that. We are going to travel back through time itself. Back through millions of years. Back to a world that was real and living and breathing. Long before any human ever opened their eyes. We're going to visit the Mesozoic Era. You may have heard that word before. Mesozoic. It sounds almost like a song when you say it slowly. The Mesozoic Era. It is the great middle chapter of Earth's long story. The time of giant reptiles and warm, shallow seas. The time of forests that had no flowers. The time when the continents were still finding their places, drifting across the planet like slow, enormous rafts. This is the world before us, and it lasted a very, very long time. We're going to walk through it gently tonight, one soft chapter at a time. You do not need to remember every name or every number. This is not a test. There is no quiz at the end. You can let the words wash over you like warm water. You can let your mind drift between the facts and the images. You can fall asleep in the middle if you want to. The story will still be here when you return. So before we begin, take one slow breath. In through the nose and out through the mouth. Good. Let your body sink a little deeper into whatever is holding you right now. Feel the weight of your arms, feel the heaviness behind your eyes. That heaviness is welcome here. That is exactly the right feeling for this journey. Now let me ask you something soft and simple. What if the world you know, the one with its cities and roads and electric lights, is only the very last page of an enormous book? What if the story of this planet stretches back so far that humans, all of human history, every empire and every invention and every name anyone ever wrote down, what if all of that is just a thin line at the very end of something almost impossibly deep? That is the truth, and tonight we're going to wander inside that deep story together, not in a frightening way, not in a way that makes you feel small and lost, but in a way that might make you feel, very gently, like part of something ancient and beautiful and much larger than any single life. The world has been here a long time, and for most of that time, it looked nothing like it does today. Let us begin. Chapter 1. A World Before Our World. Imagine standing at the edge of something. Not a cliff, not a city, but a moment in time. A kind of invisible doorway. On this side is everything familiar. On the other side is a world so different that it would take your breath away. Step through with me. The first thing you would notice is the air. It is warmer than you expect. Not unpleasantly so at first, but steady and heavy, like the feeling just before a summer storm. The air is thicker here, richer in some gases, different in its mixture. Breathing it would not feel the same as breathing the cool, modern air you're used to. The second thing you would notice is the green. It is everywhere. Enormous, lush, overflowing. But it is not the green you know. There are no oak trees with their wide, familiar leaves. No roses, no daisies, no grass even, not in the way we understand it. Instead, there are ferns taller than houses. There are enormous mossy plants called horsetails, growing in dense, quiet groves near the edges of slow rivers. There are conifer trees, ancestors of today's pines, but stranger, taller, older looking somehow. And overhead, the sky's a deep, hazy blue, slightly different in its colour, partly because of the moisture in the atmosphere, partly because of the gases hanging in the air. This is not the end of the world. This is the beginning of a particular chapter of it. This is the start of the Mesozoic. The Mesozoic era began roughly 252 million years ago. That number is very hard for a human mind to feel. So let me offer you a different way to hold it. If you squeezed all of Earth's history into a single year, and you imagine January 1st as the day the planet was born, then humans would not appear until about 11:58 on the night of December 31st, just 2 minutes before midnight. The Mesozoic era, in that same calendar, would begin somewhere around the middle of December. All of human history, every war, every song, every invention, every face anyone ever loved, would happen in the last 2 minutes of December 31st. That is how deep this goes. And we're going to rest inside that depth for a while tonight. The Mesozoic era is divided into 3 periods. You might know their names. They move from oldest to newest, like chapters in a long, slow novel. The first is the Triassic, dry and strange, a world still healing from a catastrophe. The second is the Jurassic, lush and enormous, full of giants and warm inland seas. The third is the Cretaceous, warm and flowering, reaching towards something until it ends with a terrible silence. Together, these 3 periods lasted about 186 million years. We are going to walk through all of them very slowly. Like someone walking through a museum at night when the lights are low and the sound is gone and you can take all the time in the world. Chapter 2. The end that made a beginning. Before the Mesozoic could begin, something had to end. And what ended was enormous. This is not a frightening story. I want to say that gently before we go any further. What I am about to describe happened a very, very long time ago to creatures that had their time and their chapter, just as we have ours. There is something peaceful in knowing that all things have their season. Long before the Mesozoic, there was another era called the Paleozoic, the ancient life era. For hundreds of millions of years, life had been filling this planet with strange and wonderful forms. The seas were thick with creatures. The land had been slowly colonized by plants, and then insects, and then larger animals that walked on 4 legs. At the very end of the Paleozoic, there was a time called the Permian, and at the end of the Permian, something happened that changed everything. Scientists call it the Great Dying. It is the largest mass extinction in the history of our planet. About 90% of all species on Earth disappeared. 90%. Almost all of it gone. The cause was likely a series of enormous volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia. These eruptions lasted for thousands of years. They pumped massive amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere. The oceans became warmer. They became more acidic. Oxygen levels dropped. Temperatures swung wildly. The world simply became too changed, too quickly for most life to survive. The seas emptied. The forests collapsed. The land became hot and dry and quiet. It is a sobering thing to think about. But here is what I want you to hold gently as you breathe and rest. It was not the end. After the silence, something always stirs. Life didn't disappear. It contracted, pulled back, waited in the small spaces and the cool, dark corners. And then, slowly, over millions of years, it came back. Different, stranger, more varied than before. Out of that silence came the Mesozoic, and out of the Mesozoic came the world we eventually inherited. So tonight, we are not only visiting a lost world, we are visiting the story of how life found its way back. For a moment, just breathe. Let that thought sit softly with you. The world has ended and begun again many times, and each time something gentle and persistent and curious filled the empty spaces. That is the story of life on Earth, and it is in its own quiet way a very comforting story. Chapter 3: The Triassic World. Let me paint you a picture. The year is approximately 245 million years ago. Give or take a million years or two, which here barely counts as rounding error. You're standing on a supercontinent. There are no separate land masses the way we know them today, no Atlantic Ocean between Europe and America, no Indian Ocean separating Asia from Antarctica. The world's land is pressed together into one enormous body called Pangaea. Say it slowly. Pangaea. It means all land in Old Greek. Pangaea is enormous. It stretches almost from pole to pole. Its centre is dry and sun-baked, far from the cooling influence of any ocean. The edges are softer and wetter, touched by a single vast ocean called Pangaea, the all-ocean which covered most of the planet. You're standing somewhere in what will eventually become the American Southwest. Except right now, this is not a desert. It is a broad, flat, dry plain. The ground is reddish-brown. There are low, scrubby plants near the edges of a slow river. The sky is enormous and pale above you. It is hot, but it is quiet, and it is alive. The Great Dying was only a few million years ago in geological time, which means the world is still rebuilding itself. Life here is simpler than it will become. The creatures that survived the extinction were mostly small. They were adaptable. They were quick to breed and eat and move. Among the survivors were a group called archosaurs, and the name means ruling lizards, though they were not quite lizards in the way we think of them today. They were a broad family of reptile-like animals, and from them, two very different evolutionary paths would eventually split apart. One path would lead to the crocodilians, the wide-jawed, slow-moving, patient hunters that still exist today in the world's warm rivers, barely changed in their basic design for hundreds of millions of years. The other path would lead to the dinosaurs, but in the early Triassic the dinosaurs had not yet arrived. The world belonged for a while to other things, to strange creatures like Lystrosaurus, a small, barrel-shaped animal about the size of a pig, with a rounded beak and a sturdy little body. Lystrosaurus was not glamorous. It was not fierce, but it survived the Great Dying, and it filled the empty world with its descendants, and for a while it was perhaps the most common large land animal on Earth. There is something charming about that. In the aftermath of catastrophe, the world was inherited by a small, quiet, pig-like creature that just quietly went on living. There were also early reptiles. Some were fast and slim, darting after insects. Others were larger, heavier, moving slowly through the hot Triassic afternoons. The air was full of dragonflies and beetles, insects that had survived and were thriving. In the seas, life was rebuilding too. The oceans of the Triassic were filling with new creatures. There were ichthyosaurs. The name means fish lizards, and they were remarkable. They had evolved to look almost exactly like dolphins, with streamlined bodies and large, dark eyes for seeing in deep water. They were not fish, and they were not lizards. They were reptiles who had returned to the sea, and their bodies had been shaped by millions of years of ocean living into something beautiful and efficient. There were also nothosaurs, longer and more serpentine, hunting fish near the surface. And there were the first relatives of what would become plesiosaurs, long-necked sea reptiles that would grow much more dramatic in the Jurassic. The Triassic seas were busy and strange and full of new experiments. Meanwhile, back on land, something was changing. Around 230 million years ago, the first true dinosaurs appeared. They were not the giants we imagine, not yet. The earliest dinosaurs were small, two-legged animals, quick, alert, probably nervous-looking, always scanning the horizon. One of the earliest we know well is called Euraptor, which means dawn thief. It was about the size of a medium dog. It ate small animals and possibly some plants. It moved fast on its hind legs, its little arms held close to its chest. It did not look like it was going to take over the world. And yet, something in its body plan, the upright stance, the efficient legs, the quick metabolism, would prove to be an extraordinary advantage. Over millions and millions of years, that basic design would be refined and enlarged and specialized into forms almost beyond imagining. But that is a story for a little later. For now, let us rest in the early Triassic. Let us stand on that warm red plain and listen to the insects. Let us watch the slow river move past the fern-covered banks. Let us notice the low sun, the hazy sky, and the enormous quiet of a world still finding its new shape. If your eyes are growing heavy, let them close. The story is not going anywhere. I will still be here, speaking softly, when you surface again. Chapter 4. Pangaea begins to break. There is a kind of comfort in watching something massive move very slowly. A glacier, for example, or a cloud bank rolling across a mountain range, or the tide going out on a long flat beach. The movement of continents has this same quality. You cannot feel it. Not in a single human lifetime, not even across many generations of human memory, but it is happening always beneath the surface of our awareness. The ground beneath us is moving. It has always been moving. The tectonic plates, enormous slabs of rock that make up the outer shell of the Earth, float on the slightly softer rock below, driven by heat rising from deep inside the planet. During the Triassic, Pangaea was beginning to crack. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, quietly, impossibly slowly, the great land mass was starting to split. The first division was roughly north and south. The northern part, which scientists call Laurasia, began to pull away from the southern part, which they call Gondwana. Between them, a shallow inland sea called the Tethys began to open up. Warm and clear and rich in sunlight, the Tethys Sea would become one of the great marine ecosystems of the Mesozoic. This splitting of Pangaea did something important. It created more coastline, and coastline means shallow water, and shallow water, especially in warm tropical regions, is one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth. Sunlight reaches the bottom, and plants and algae grow thick and rich. Small creatures eat the plants, larger creatures eat the small creatures. The web of life fills in quickly. As Pangaea cracked and the new seas formed, life had more places to spread, more environments to adapt to, more edges and corners to explore. And in that expanding complexity, the dinosaurs began to grow. By the late Triassic, dinosaurs were no longer just small darting animals. Some had grown to impressive sizes. Plateosaurus, for example, was a plant eater from what is now Europe that could reach about 8 meters in length. It walked sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes on 2. Its neck was long enough to reach into the canopy of low conifer trees. It moved in herds, probably, the way some large herbivores do today, finding safety in numbers. The Plateosaurus was not yet the colossus it would become in later eras, but it was a sign of where things were headed. The dinosaurs were experimenting with size, and size, as it turned out, was one of the most successful experiments in the history of land life. But then, near the end of the Triassic, roughly 201 million years ago, there was another crisis, another mass extinction. This one was smaller than the Great Dying, but still devastating. A large volcanic event, possibly connected to the continued breakup of Pangaea, released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Temperatures rose, the world shifted again. Many creatures that had filled the Triassic were gone, but the dinosaurs survived. And when the world opened up again at the start of the Jurassic, they were ready. For a moment, just breathe. Feel the air moving in, moving out, slow and steady. Your body knows exactly what to do. It has been doing this your whole life, even when you sleep, even when you're not paying attention at all. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Let yourself settle a little deeper. We're about to enter the most famous chapter of the Mesozoic, the time of the giants. Chapter 5. The beginning of the Jurassic. The world at the start of the Jurassic was wetter. The great volcanic events that ended the Triassic had pumped carbon dioxide into the air, and over time the warming climate had increased evaporation from the seas. Rain came more often. The dry, dusty interior of the old Pangaean heartland began to soften. Rivers spread, wetlands formed, forests grew thicker and taller, and the dinosaurs, life freed from competition with many of the creatures that had shared the Triassic world, began to fill every available role. This is one of the patterns that appears again and again in the story of life. When a gap opens, something fills it. When a niche becomes available, evolution finds its way there, sometimes quickly by geological standards, sometimes slowly. But the process never really stops. The early Jurassic saw an explosion of new dinosaur forms. Some were becoming giants. The long-necked sauropods, the great plant eaters that we often think of first when we imagine dinosaurs, were growing larger with each passing million years. Their design was elegant in its logic. A very long neck allowed them to reach enormous amounts of vegetation without moving their massive bodies very often. A barrel-like body could ferment and digest enormous quantities of tough plant material. Pillar-like legs supported all that weight. To be a sauropod was to move slowly through a world of plenty, sweeping your long neck across the canopy like a living crane, eating almost constantly, processing hundreds of kilograms of ferns and conifers every single day. There is something almost meditative about imagining that. A creature so large that it moved like a geological feature, slow and steady and inevitable, consuming the world one mouthful at a time. Early Jurassic sauropods were already impressive, but they had not yet reached their true maximum. That would come in the middle and late Jurassic. For now, picture animals the size of large elephants, maybe a little larger, moving in small groups through the forest edges. Meanwhile, the other dinosaurs were going in the opposite direction. Theropods, the two-legged meat-eating dinosaurs, were also diversifying. Some were small and fast, hunting insects and small lizards. Others were mid-sized, hunting the juveniles of larger animals or scavenging from carcasses. And the pterosaurs, the flying reptiles, were already filling the air. Pterosaurs are often confused with dinosaurs, but they were not dinosaurs. They were close relatives, archosaurs like the dinosaurs, but their own distinct group. They were the first vertebrates, meaning the first animals with a backbone to achieve powered flight. Their wings were made of a membrane of skin and muscle, stretched from an enormously elongated fourth finger to their hind limbs. The membrane was not like a bird's wing or a bat's wing. Though it had some similarities to the bats, it was its own invention, its own solution to the problem of flight. In the early Jurassic, pterosaurs were mostly small. Some were the size of pigeons, others the size of large seagulls. They flapped and glided over the ancient forests and the new shallow seas, hunting fish and insects, their strange crested heads tipped into the wind. Imagine looking up into the Jurassic sky and seeing those shapes moving against the haze, long-tailed, narrow-winged, silent in their soaring. Not birds, not bats, something older and stranger. The sky belonged to them for now, and the seas had their own rulers. In the Jurassic oceans, the ichthyosaurs were still present, still hunting in those dark, deep waters with their huge dark eyes. But new creatures had arrived. Then the plesiosaurs had grown into their most recognizable forms, long, graceful necks on wide, flat bodies, 4 flippers moving in a kind of underwater flying. They moved through the warm, clear Jurassic seas like great silent birds. The Jurassic Sea was warm and shallow in many places and rich. Coral reefs were building. Ammonites, those beautifully coiled sea creatures whose fossils we still find today, were everywhere, spiraling through the blue water in their thousands. The ocean hummed with life, and on the land the forests were growing taller and more complex. Maybe you're listening to all of this in the dark, and you're beginning to feel that particular soft heaviness that comes before sleep. The kind where the thoughts slow down and images begin to rise on their own, unbidden. Maybe you're beginning to see those forests, those great dark Jurassic forests in your own quiet way. That is exactly right. Let that happen. The story does not require you to stay alert. It only asks that you rest inside it for a while. If your breathing has slowed, that is good. If your body has grown still and heavy, that is exactly what it is supposed to do. Let the Jurassic world breathe around you in the dark. The ferns are enormous. The air is warm and thick. Somewhere in the distance, the deep resonant sound of something very large moving slowly through the trees. The world turns slowly, and so do we. We will go deeper into the Jurassic in our next chapter. We will visit the giants at the height of their power. We will stand beneath the neck of a Brachiosaurus and look up at a sky half hidden by leaves. But there is no rush. We have all night. And the story has been waiting 180 million years already. A few more minutes will not matter at all, so breathe and rest, and let the ancient world hold you for a little while. Close your eyes for a moment, if they are not already closed. I want you to imagine something very simple and very large. Imagine a forest, but not any forest you've ever walked through before. The trees here are not the oaks or maples or birches you might know. They are something older, something stranger. Cycads with their thick trunks and stiff palm-like crowns. Tree ferns rising in quiet clusters near the banks of slow, dark rivers. Conifers so tall that their tops disappear into the warm haze above, their bark rough and resinous, their roots spreading wide across the soft ground. The air here is warm and heavy. It smells of wet earth and green growth and something faintly sweet, like sap warming in the sun. The light comes down in long, soft columns through the canopy. It falls in patches on the mossy floor, and in those patches tiny insects float in and out of the brightness. Everything here is slow. Everything here is ancient. And then you feel something. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure, a low, steady vibration moving up through the ground beneath your feet, through the soles of your shoes, up into your legs, your chest, your ribs. It comes again and again, steady and rhythmic and impossibly large. The ferns ahead of you tremble. A branch snaps somewhere in the canopy far overhead. And then a neck rises above the tree line. Just the neck at first, long and pale and moving in a slow, gentle arc. The way a crane arm moves at a construction site, but alive, breathing, covered in soft grey-green skin with faint patterns of shadow and light. And then the body follows, and nothing prepares you for the body. This is a Brachiosaurus. It is roughly 26 meters from the tip of its nose to the end of its tail. Its heart, which must push blood all the way up that towering neck against gravity, is approximately the size of a small car. Its legs are like stone pillars, each one wider around than a grown man's arm span. Its footsteps, each one landing with that low vibration you felt a moment ago, press deep into the soft Jurassic earth. It does not notice you. You are far too small, far too quiet, far too brief. It simply continues eating, methodical and unhurried. Yeah, stripping a mouthful of conifer needles from a branch 60 feet above the ground. A deep sound moves through its chest, something between a breath and a rumble. Then it takes 3 enormous steps to the left, each one landing like a slow drumbeat, and reaches its neck toward a new section of canopy. Welcome to the Middle Jurassic. This is the age of the sauropods, and it is one of the most extraordinary chapters in the long story of life on Earth. The sauropods were the largest land animals that have ever lived on this planet, not just during the Mesozoic, not just among dinosaurs. Of all the creatures that have ever walked on solid ground, in all of Earth's 4.5 billion years, nothing has ever grown as large as the greatest sauropods, and the Jurassic was their golden age. Different species had different shapes and different strategies. Brachiosaurus held its neck almost vertically, like a giraffe magnified beyond all reason, reaching high into the canopy for leaves that smaller animals could never touch. Diplodocus was built more horizontally, its extraordinarily long neck sweeping low and wide, and its tail tapering to a thin whip-like tip that may have been used for communication or defense. Then there was Apatosaurus, massively built, slow and powerful, and Brontosaurus, whose name was lost for a while in scientific debate and then quietly restored, to the quiet satisfaction of everyone who had always loved the name. And Supersaurus, which may have reached nearly 34 meters in length, long enough to stretch across a city intersection with room to spare on both ends. Each one was a variation on the same elegant theme, a vast barrel of a body supported on column legs, a long, flexible neck for reaching vegetation without moving that massive body more than necessary, a small, simple head with peg-like teeth for raking leaves rather than chewing them. The real digestion happened in the enormous fermentation chambers of the gut, where tough plant material was slowly broken down with the help of microbes. To be a sauropod was to be a living landscape feature, to move through the world slowly, eating almost constantly, converting ancient sunlight stored in ferns and conifers into bone and muscle and the low, steady warmth of a living body. They moved in loose groups, probably. Not a tight herd like wildebeest crossing a river, but a more relaxed association, the way elephants move across a savanna, each following the best forage, covering long distances across the seasons, shaping the landscape simply by being in it. Where sauropods walked regularly, the ground was packed hard. Where they fed, sections of canopy were stripped open, letting new light reach the forest floor, changing what grew there. Their enormous quantities of dung spread seeds and fertilized the soil across wide areas. They were not just living in the landscape, they were, in a very real sense, building it. There is something deeply calming about that thought. To be so fully present in the world that your existence shapes it without any intention or effort. To simply be, and in being, to matter. Let that rest with you for a moment. Chapter 7. The Hunters and the Hunted. Of course, where there are giants, there are those who test them. The great predatory dinosaurs of the Jurassic were among the most remarkable hunters this planet has ever seen. And the most famous of the Jurassic hunters was Allosaurus. Allosaurus was a large, two-legged carnivore. Full adults could reach around 12 meters in length. They were powerfully built through the hips and thighs, with shorter but strong arms ending in three-fingered hands bearing sharp, curved claws. Their skull was large and somewhat lightly built, with bony ridges above the eyes, and their jaws were lined with serrated, blade-shaped teeth, designed not so much for crushing as for slicing. Scientists have studied Allosaurus extensively, and what has emerged is a picture of a sophisticated predator. Evidence in the bones of sauropods has shown clear Allosaurus bite marks, some of which show signs of healed bone around them, meaning the prey animal survived at least some of those encounters. This tells us something quiet and important. The giants were not helpless. Their size was itself a defense. A healthy adult sauropod was probably nearly impossible to bring down by a single predator. The juveniles, the sick, the elderly, these were the more likely targets, The relationship between Allosaurus and the great sauropods played out over millions of years. The predator shaped the prey through evolutionary pressure, selecting for animals that were larger, that stayed in groups, that had particular defensive behaviours, and the prey shaped the predator, selecting for hunters that were faster, smarter, more efficient. It is a conversation conducted not in words but in bodies and time, the slowest, most patient conversation imaginable. Scattered among the larger predators were dozens of smaller theropods, quick, lightly built, some of them feathered. They occupied the same roles that foxes and hawks and weasels occupy today, hunting small lizards, insects, eggs, the small mammals that moved through the undergrowth at night, and yes, feathered. This is worth pausing on for a moment, because it changes everything about how we picture the Jurassic world. For most of the 20th century, the popular image of dinosaurs was of slow, cold, scaly creatures, grey or brown, moving sluggishly through a dull world. That image came partly from a misunderstanding of their biology, and partly from the way the earlier scientists interpreted their fossils. We now know the reality was far richer. Many theropod dinosaurs had feathers, or at least proto-feathery filaments, covering parts of their bodies. Not the large flight feathers of birds necessarily, but something like a dense, fuzzy insulating coat, and in some species, longer display feathers on the arms and tail. We also now have strong evidence that many dinosaurs were warm-blooded, or something close to it. They grew quickly. They were active. Some cared for their nests and their young. Their behaviour was complex in ways we're still working to understand. The Jurassic world was not grey and slow and dim. It was warm and bright and busy. It was loud with insects and the calls of animals. It was full of colour, probably, the way the modern tropics are full of colour, because colour is used for recognition and display and warning, and those pressures existed in the Mesozoic just as they do today. If you close your eyes and try to picture the Jurassic not as a grey lizard world, but as something more like an enormous, overflowing, ancient version of a tropical rainforest, you will be much closer to the truth. Let that image settle in you now. The warm light, the layered green, the sound of things moving just out of sight. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 8. The Sky Above and the Sea Below. Let us move for a moment. Let us leave the forest floor and climb gently to somewhere with a wider view. Imagine standing on a rocky bluff above a Jurassic coastline. Below you, the sea stretches out flat and glittering in the afternoon light. It is warm and clear, shallow for a long way out. The bottom visible through the pale green water, covered in waving sea plants and slow-moving shapes. Farther out, the colour deepens from pale green to blue to a deep, almost purple darkness, where the shelf drops away and the true ocean begins. The air here smells of salt and warm rock. A breeze moves past your face, gentle and constant, and above you shapes are moving in the sky. Pterosaurs. They wheel and glide on the updrafts rising from the sun-warmed cliff face. Some are small, narrow-winged, quick and darting. Others are larger, with wingspans of a metre or more, riding the thermals with barely a wing beat, tilting slightly to adjust their course. The pterosaurs were not dinosaurs, though they were close relatives. They were the first vertebrates in Earth's history to achieve powered flight. Before them, nothing with a backbone had ever truly flown, and they solved the problem of flight in their own unique way, stretching a membrane of skin and muscle from one enormously elongated finger to their body, creating a wing unlike anything that had come before or would come after. One of the most graceful Jurassic pterosaurs was Rhamphorhynchus. It had a long tail with a diamond-shaped flap of skin at the end, and its jaws were long and narrow, filled with interlocking needle teeth for catching fish. Fossils have been found in the extraordinary Jurassic limestone deposits of what is now Germany, sometimes preserved so perfectly that the wing membrane itself is visible as a ghostly impression in the rock. Sometimes even a fish is preserved inside the region where the stomach would have been. A final meal, recorded in stone across 150 million years. Picture a Rhamphorhynchus hunting above the water. It glides low, its long tail trailing behind it, barely a meter above the gentle waves. It is watching the surface. Then something catches its eye, a flash of silver just below the water's skin, and it dips its head forward in one smooth motion, those needle teeth snapping shut around a small fish, and it is already lifting back into the air before the ripple has finished spreading. It carries its catch toward the cliffs. The sea glitters below. The sky is wide and pale and full of slow-moving shapes. Down in that sea, below the glittering surface, other lives were unfolding. The Jurassic Ocean was full of ammonites. You may have seen their fossils in museums or in rock shops, those beautiful coiled shells of mathematical precision. In the Jurassic seas they were everywhere, in dozens and eventually hundreds of species, each one slightly different in the pattern of its shell, the spacing of its ribs, the shape of its opening. They were cephalopods, relatives of today's squid and octopus and nautilus, but living inside their coiled shells, moving through the water by jet propulsion, hunting small prey with their tentacles. When ammonites died, their shells sank slowly to the seafloor. Over millions of years, the sediment built up around them compressed, hardened into limestone or shale, and the shell, or its impression, was preserved inside the rock. Today those rocks have been lifted by tectonics and eroded by weather and exposed along cliff faces and riverbeds, and if you know where to look, you can find them. You can hold in your hand a perfect spiral that was last touched by living water 150 million years ago. There is something profoundly quiet in that, something that puts the rushing pace of our own lives into a very gentle perspective. Below the ammonites, in the deeper water, larger hunters moved. Ichthyosaurs, the dolphin-shaped marine reptiles that had first appeared in the Triassic, were still present and thriving. Some Jurassic ichthyosaurs were very large, reaching 10 meters or more in length. They had enormous eyes, some of the largest of any vertebrate animal known, adapted for hunting in low-light conditions deep beneath the surface, and the plesiosaurs had come fully into their own. Long-necked, four-flippered, moving through the water with a kind of underwater flying motion, their four broad flippers rowing them forward in smooth, powerful strokes. Their small heads sat at the ends of necks that could be several meters long, more than they used those necks to dart after fish with quick, precise strikes. The Jurassic Sea was a world of extraordinary beauty and complexity, warm, clear, rich with life, layered from the sunlit surface down through the twilight zone to the cold darkness of the deep. It is hard to imagine it all being gone, but nothing stays the same, not the sea, not the sky, not the creatures that live in them. All of it is always, slowly becoming something else. And that is not a sad thing. When you sit with it quietly, it is simply the nature of time. Chapter 9. A small thing in the trees. Now I want to tell you about something easy to miss. Something small, in the high branches of a Jurassic conifer, where the air is a little cooler and the light comes through in thin gold-green threads. Something is moving. It is small, about the size of a crow or maybe a raven. Its body is covered in feathers, dark and iridescent. Its wings are not quite like a bird's wings, not exactly. There are small curved claws at the bend of each wing. Its tail is long and bony, with feathers running along each side of it. Its head turns in that quick, precise way that birds still turn their heads today, checking angles, assessing distances, reading the world. It is Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is one of the most famous fossils ever found. Its remains were discovered in the limestone deposits of Bavaria, in what is now Germany, and the first specimen was described in 1861, just 2 years after Charles Darwin published his theory of evolution by natural selection. The timing felt almost designed. Here, because Archaeopteryx was exactly the kind of creature Darwin's theory predicted must exist but that no one had yet found. A transitional form, something in between. It had feathers, real, asymmetrical flight feathers exactly like those of modern birds. It had a wishbone. It had wings. But it also had teeth in its jaws, which no modern bird has. It had clawed fingers on its wings. It had a long, bony tail. It was a dinosaur, and it was becoming something else. Scientists now understand that birds are, in a very real, less technical sense, living dinosaurs. They are the surviving branch of the theropod family, the descendants of small, feathered bipedal dinosaurs that began experimenting with gliding and flight in the trees and undergrowth of the late Jurassic. Every bird you've ever seen, the sparrow on a winter feeder, the heron standing still at the edge of a pond, the swift cutting through a summer sky, every one of them carries in its body the deep legacy of the Mesozoic. They are the dinosaurs that made it through. I find that quietly wonderful, that the age of dinosaurs did not simply end, that something of it persisted, changed and feathered and singing, and is still here, still moving through the air every single day. If you hear a bird outside your window tomorrow morning, that is the Mesozoic saying good morning. For a moment, just breathe. The world is very old, and more of it has survived than we usually realise. Chapter 10. The Jurassic Evening. The day is turning now. In the late Jurassic landscape of what would one day become Western North America, the sun is moving toward the horizon. The light is changing from the clear, hard brightness of afternoon to something softer and more golden. Shadows are growing long across the red-brown earth. This is the world of the Morrison Formation, a vast layer of ancient rock that has given paleontologists some of their most extraordinary finds. Allosaurus and Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus and Stegosaurus all lived here in this landscape at roughly the same time, moving through the same river systems and floodplains and forested uplands. Stegosaurus is moving slowly through the late afternoon light near the edge of a shallow river. Its body is large, roughly the size of a family van. Its back legs are longer than its front legs, giving it a distinctive forward-tilted posture. Along its back, rising in 2 alternating rows, are large diamond-shaped plates of bone, upright and slightly fanned. Their exact purpose is still a matter of gentle scientific debate. They may have helped regulate body temperature, like radiator fins, warming quickly in the morning sun and shedding heat in a breeze. They may have been used in display, flushed with blood to signal to others of its kind. They may have served more than one purpose at once, and at the tail 4 long spikes, nearly 1 meter each, pointing backward and outward. Scientists gave this tail weapon a name, the Thagomizer. The name actually came from a newspaper comic strip in the 1980s and was later adopted with affectionate seriousness by paleontologists. I love that detail. A creature from 150 million years ago with a tail weapon named by a cartoonist. The Stegosaurus does not care about any of this. It is eating. It is slowly sweeping its beaked head close to the ground, cropping ferns and low cycad fronds. Around it, the river sounds quiet and steady. The light is warm on those back plates. In the undergrowth nearby, something small moves quickly and is gone. A tiny mammal, one of the many small, furry, mostly nocturnal creatures that shared the Mesozoic world with the dinosaurs. These mammals were not impressive, Not yet. They were small and cautious and mostly unseen. They lived in the cracks and shadows of a world that belonged to the giants, but they were there, waiting, without knowing they were waiting for their own chapter to begin. The light is nearly golden now. The conifer tops are lit from the side, glowing faintly amber. A pterosaur passes overhead, high and silent, its long shadow sweeping briefly across the ground. Somewhere in the middle distance, a sauropod is moving between the trees, its neck swaying in that slow pendulum rhythm, headed for water before the night comes in. The insects are beginning their evening noise, a soft layered hum rising from the grass and the fern beds and the river edge. Everything here is slow and full and warm. There is no reason, standing in this evening light, to imagine that anything about this world could end. And yet, change is already gathering, as it always is, slow and invisible and patient in the deep processes of the planet. But that is not tonight's worry. Tonight, the Jurassic evening is perfect, and you are here inside it, resting, breathing, letting the golden light fall softly over everything. If your eyes are closed, leave them closed. If your breathing has slowed down to something long and quiet, let it stay there. The world has been turning for a very long time, long before you arrived in it, and it will go on turning long after. And right now, in this moment, all you need to do is rest inside that turning. The story continues. The Cretaceous is coming, with its flowering world and its warm, shallow seas, and its extraordinary final chapter. But we'll get there slowly. The way the continents moved, the way the sauropods walked, one quiet step at a time, the world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 11. The world begins to flower. Something is changing. You can feel it if you know how to be still enough. Not a sudden change, not a sharp crack or a dramatic shift. Just the slow, quiet accumulation of something new. The way morning light changes. Not all at once, but degree by degree, until the room is different from how it was an hour ago, and you cannot point to the exact moment it turned. The Jurassic is behind us now. We are moving into the Cretaceous. Say it gently. Cretaceous. It means chalky in Old Latin, named for the great chalk deposits that formed during this time in the shallow seas of what is now Europe. The white cliffs of Dover in England, those famous pale walls rising above the English Channel, are made of Cretaceous chalk. They are built from the compressed remains of billions of tiny marine organisms that lived and died in a warm, shallow sea about 100 million years ago. Every time someone looks at these cliffs, they are looking at the Cretaceous. It is closer than we think sometimes. And the Cretaceous began roughly 145 million years ago and lasted until 66 million years ago. That is nearly 80 million years. Longer than the Jurassic, long enough for the world to transform itself several times over. And the most important transformation of the Cretaceous, the one that changed the planet more profoundly than almost anything else in the Mesozoic, was something that seems almost gentle when you first hear it. Flowers. Flowering plants appeared and began to spread across the world during the Cretaceous. Before them, the land was green but flowerless. Ferns and cycads and conifers. Ancient, efficient but simple in their reproduction. They released their pollen into the wind and hoped for the best. Flowering plants did something different. They formed partnerships. They offered something, a nectar and colour and scent, to insects and other animals, and in exchange those animals carried pollen directly from one flower to another, a far more efficient and reliable system than trusting the wind. It was one of the most successful partnerships in the history of life, and once it began, it spread with extraordinary speed in geological terms. Within a few tens of millions of years, flowering plants had colonized almost every environment on Earth. Forests changed, meadows appeared, the smells of the world changed, the sounds changed, The insects diversified enormously to exploit the new food sources. The world became, in a very real way, more colourful. And the dinosaurs lived inside this changing world, adapting to it, feeding on it, being shaped by it just as they shaped it in return. Imagine walking through an early Cretaceous forest. It is not yet the riot of colour that a modern tropical forest presents. The flowers are still early, still experimenting, smaller and simpler than the blossoms we know today. But here and there, among the familiar cycads and ferns and dark conifers, there are patches of something new. A low plant with small white flowers, catching the morning light. A cluster of something pink near the edge of a stream. Small things, but beginnings. The beginning of colour coming into a green world. Close your eyes and hold that image gently. A world going slowly from green to green and colour. A world becoming, very slowly, more like the one you know. Chapter 12. The Seas of the Cretaceous. Let us go to the water. The Cretaceous world had more ocean than the world we live in today. Yet the sea levels were higher, significantly higher, because the climate was warmer and there were no large polar ice caps to lock water away on land. The water that today sits frozen in Antarctica and Greenland was, in the Cretaceous, part of the ocean. This meant that large parts of the continents were flooded by shallow inland seas. In North America, a body of water called the Western Interior Seaway split the continent roughly in half from north to south. To the west was the beginnings of the Rocky Mountains, still young and rising. To the east were low coastal plains, and between them, this warm, shallow sea stretched for thousands of kilometres, shimmering in the Cretaceous sun. It was not a deep sea. In many places it was only a few hundred metres deep, but it was rich, extraordinarily rich. The waters were warm. Sunlight reached the bottom across wide areas. Marine plants and algae grew in dense underwater meadows. Small creatures fed on the plants. Larger creatures fed on the small ones. The food web built up quickly and completely, and in these warm Cretaceous seas lived some of the most remarkable marine animals that ever existed. The mosasaurs were perhaps the most dramatic. They were large marine reptiles, not dinosaurs, not plesiosaurs, but their own distinct group related to modern monitor lizards. Over millions of years, their bodies had become fully adapted to ocean life. Their limbs had become flippers. Their tails had developed a fin. Their jaws were long and powerful, lined with strong conical teeth for gripping fish and crushing ammonites. The largest mosasaurs were enormous. Mosasaurus itself could reach 15 meters or more in length, longer than a city bus. Tylosaurus, another large species, was similarly impressive. They were apex predators of the Cretaceous seas, moving through the warm water with long, sinuous body movements, hunting whatever they could catch. Plesiosaurs were still present too. By the Cretaceous, they had split into two main groups. The long-necked plesiosaurs, with their small heads and graceful necks, and the plesiosaurs, which had shorter necks and much larger heads, built more for power than for the delicate fish darting of their long-necked relatives. Some Cretaceous plesiosaurs had skulls nearly 3 meters long, with jaws that could exert crushing force. The ammonites were still there, still spiralling through the water in their thousands. By the Cretaceous, they had diversified into extraordinary forms. Some species had shells that were not neatly coiled but loosely wound, or spiral in 3 dimensions or almost straight. These unusual forms are called heteromorphs, and they are among the most visually strange fossils ever found. Scientists are still not entirely sure why some ammonites evolved such seemingly impractical shell shapes, but the variety of them is remarkable, like nature experimenting with the idea of a spiral just to see how many variations were possible. And there were fish. The Cretaceous seas were full of fish in enormous diversity. Some were large predators in their own right. Xiphactinus was a large, aggressive Cretaceous fish reaching up to 6 meters in length, with a deeply forked tail for speed and an enormous upward-turned jaw. A famous fossil of Xiphactinus was found with a nearly intact smaller fish preserved inside its body cavity, swallowed whole, perhaps so large a meal that it proved fatal for the hunter. The sea gives, and the sea takes. This is something that has been true since there was a sea at all. Picture the Western Interior Seaway in the late afternoon. The surface is calm, reflecting the pale blue sky. A few ripples spread from where something large passed just below the surface a moment ago. Farther out, the fin of a mosasaur breaks the water for a moment, then slides back under. In the shallows near the shore, long-legged wading birds, or the ancestors of birds, move carefully through the warm water, picking at small creatures in the mud. The sky is wide and quiet. A warm breeze moves across the surface of the water and keeps moving. Inland, across the coastal plain, into the forests where the dinosaurs are living their slow, enormous lives. For a moment, just breathe. Feel the warmth. Feel the width of that ancient sky. There is nothing to do right now but rest inside this old, beautiful world. Chapter 13. The Dinosaurs of the Cretaceous. The Cretaceous brought new kinds of dinosaurs. The great sauropods were still present, especially in the southern continents of Gondwana, which were still splitting apart and drifting. In what is now South America, some of the largest sauropods that ever lived were walking through Cretaceous forests. Peter Gottiton, a recently discovered species from Argentina, may have been the largest land animal of all time, reaching perhaps 70 metric tons. Its upper leg bone alone is nearly 2.5 meters tall. Standing next to that bone in a museum, a full-grown human barely reaches its midpoint. But in the northern continents, the ecological story was shifting. The hadrosaurs were rising. Hadrosaurs, sometimes called duck-billed dinosaurs because of the broad, flat shape of their snouts, were among the most successful plant-eating dinosaurs of the Cretaceous. They were large, moving on 2 or 4 legs depending on what they were doing, with rows of hundreds of tightly packed teeth forming a grinding surface for processing tough plant material. What made hadrosaurs particularly fascinating were the structures on their heads. Some species had elaborate bony crests. Parasaurolophus had a long, hollow crest curving backward from its skull, sometimes nearly 1 meter long, that connected to its nasal passages. When air was pushed through this crest, it likely produced a deep, resonant, almost musical sound. Scientists have attempted to model this acoustically, and the results suggest Parasaurolophus may have called with a low, haunting sound, something like a horn or a large woodwind instrument. Imagine a herd of Parasaurolophus moving through a Cretaceous forest at dusk, their crests catching the last light, and then one of them calls, a long, low, resonant sound that moves through the trees and across the water and fades into the evening. Other animals lift their heads briefly, and then the forest settles again. There were also the ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs. Triceratops is the most famous, but it was actually one of the last and largest members of a very diverse family. Earlier ceratopsians were smaller, some barely larger than a dog. But by the late Cretaceous, they'd grown into impressive animals with elaborate arrangements of horns and frills. The frill of a ceratopsian was a large bony extension of the skull, projecting backward over the neck. In some species it was solid bone. In others it was partly open, edged with small bony projections. The frills were probably brightly coloured in life, used in display and recognition, and possibly in regulating body temperature. Triceratops itself was a large, heavy animal, roughly 9 meters long, with 2 long brow horns and a shorter nose horn, and a broad, solid frill behind its head. It moved in herds across the Cretaceous landscapes of what is now western North America, cropping low vegetation with its powerful parrot-like beak. And then there were the ankylosaurs. If sauropods represented the strategy of being very large, and hadrosaurs represented the strategy of being very numerous and very social, ankylosaurs represented something different. They were fortresses. An ankylosaur was covered from head to tail in a mosaic of bony plates and knobs embedded in its skin called osteoderms. Some species also had spikes projecting from their sides, and the most specialized ankylosaurs, like Ankylosaurus itself, had a massive club of fused bone at the end of their tail, heavy enough and swung with enough force to shatter the bones of an attacking predator. They were slow, they were low to the ground, they were not impressive in the way that a large predator or a towering sauropod is impressive, but they were extraordinary in their own quiet way, like a living boulder, like something the world had tried to erode for millions of years and simply could not. There is a kind of beauty in that kind of persistence, in being so thoroughly yourself that the world simply cannot find a way through. Let your breathing be slow and easy now. Feel the weight of your own body, steady and resting, the way an ankylosaur rested in the Cretaceous afternoon, low and warm and completely at ease. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 14. The Great Predators of the Cretaceous. And then there was Tyrannosaurus rex. I want to say its name slowly and gently because it deserves to be held carefully. It is one of the most famous animals that ever lived, and sometimes familiarity can make us forget how extraordinary it truly was. Tyrannosaurus rex. The name means tyrant lizard king. It was not a lizard. We know that now. It was a warm-blooded, highly active, probably partially feathered dinosaur, deeply related to the birds that still fill our skies today. But the name carries the right emotional weight. There was something about Tyrannosaurus that was, in its own time and place, genuinely regal. It was one of the largest land predators that ever lived. Adults reached approximately 12 to 13 meters in length. They weighed somewhere between 8 and 14 metric tons depending on the individual. Their skull was enormous, over a meter long in large adults, and their bite force was among the strongest ever measured for any land animal, capable of crushing bone entirely. Those famous short arms have been the subject of jokes for decades, but they were not useless. They were heavily muscled and tipped with two sharp, curved claws. Some scientists now think they may have been used to grip prey at close range, once the teeth had made the initial contact. Tyrannosaurus lived in the very last part of the Cretaceous, in western North America. It shared its world with Triceratops and the hadrosaurs and the ankylosaurs we just visited. It was, in that ecosystem, the apex predator, the top of the food chain, the thing that everything else had to consider when moving through the world. How it hunted has been long debated. Early theories suggested it might have been primarily a scavenger because of its relatively small eyes for its skull size and the way its arms seemed insufficient for wrestling large prey. But more recent analysis has shifted the picture. Tyrannosaurus almost certainly hunted actively, using its extraordinary sense of smell, its binocular vision which gave it good depth perception, and its speed, which was probably somewhere between walking quickly and a moderate run, to locate, pursue and ambush large prey. There is a particular kind of awe in thinking about what it might have been like to share a landscape with Tyrannosaurus. Not terror, necessarily, because terror is exhausting, and I do not want to bring that into this quiet night, but a kind of profound, humbling awe. The awareness of something so much larger and more powerful than yourself that its presence changes the weight of the air. The hadrosaurs must have felt it. The Triceratops herds, perhaps. Some deep, wordless alertness that coloured every moment of their lives in that late Cretaceous landscape. And yet they lived. They grazed and called and nested and raised their young. They moved through the world in their herds and their family groups. They were not defined by the predator. They simply lived alongside it, as fully as they could, as all living things do, there is something there that is worth holding quietly for a moment. Whatever the weight or the challenge of the world around us, life finds its way to be fully itself. It grazes, it calls, it rests, and so can we. Chapter 15. Feathers and Wings and the Living Bridge. We have talked about feathers before, gently in passing, but now I want to spend a little more time with them, because feathers are one of the most remarkable structures that evolution has ever produced. A single feather is an extraordinary thing. Examine one closely sometime, a flight feather from any modern bird, and you'll see how it is built. A central shaft, stiff and lightweight. Branching from the shaft on each side a series of barbs, and branching from each barb a series of barbules with tiny hooks that interlock with the barbules on neighbouring barbs, creating a surface that is both flexible and aerodynamically smooth. The whole structure is incredibly light. A feather weighs almost nothing, and yet it is strong enough to bear the forces of flight, to resist wind, to shed water, to trap air and warmth. Feathers began, as far as we can tell from the fossil evidence, not as flight structures but as insulation. Simple filamentous proto-feathers, more like fine hair than anything we would call a feather today, helped small theropod dinosaurs retain body heat. Over millions of years these structures diversified. Some became more complex, some became flattened. Yes, some began to be used for display, the way peacocks and birds of paradise use their feathers today. And eventually, in some lineages, they became long enough and stiff enough and precisely shaped enough for gliding, and then for flight. This transition happened gradually, over a very long time, through many small steps that each had their own advantages independent of flight. You did not need to suddenly be able to fly for feathers to be useful. You only needed feathers to be slightly better than not having feathers at each small step along the way. By the Cretaceous, the skies above the dinosaur world were increasingly full of birds. Not just Archaeopteryx-like transitional forms, but animals that would look recognizable to modern eyes. Some Cretaceous birds still had teeth, some had clawed wings. But many were flying with real proficiency, nesting in cliffs and trees, hunting fish over the Cretaceous seaways, filling the air with the business of their lives. Alongside them, the pterosaurs had reached their own peak of diversity and size. The largest pterosaurs of the Cretaceous were almost beyond imagining. Quetzalcoatlus, named after the feathered serpent deity of Aztec mythology, had a wingspan estimated at 10 to 11 meters. 10 to 11 meters, wider than a small airplane. When it stood on the ground, it may have been as tall as a giraffe. The mechanics of how something that large could fly are still actively studied and debated by scientists. It seems to have been a soarer rather than a flapper, using thermals and updrafts to stay aloft, the way albatrosses and condors do today, minimizing the energy cost of powered wing beats over long distances. Some researchers now think the largest pterosaurs may have spent much of their time on the ground, stalking across open habitats on their folded wings like enormous stiff-legged herons, using their long beaks to probe for prey. Whatever the precise details, the image is remarkable. An animal with the wingspan of a small airplane, walking slowly across the Cretaceous landscape, its shadow sweeping wide across the ground, and then unfolding those enormous wings and catching an updraft and rising, until it is just a speck against the pale sky. What a world that was. What a full, strange, layered, extraordinary world. If your eyes are closed, let these images come and go like clouds. You do not need to hold them. You do not need to remember them. Just let them move through your mind the way the wind moves through a field, leaving it changed in some small, soft way. For a moment, just breathe. Notice your body. Notice how still it has become. Notice how the sounds around you, whatever sounds are there, the hum of a fan, the settling of a house, the distant noise of the night, have become background, have become the texture of the darkness rather than interruptions in it. That is the right feeling. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Let us drift a little further now into the quieter passages of the Cretaceous before we reach its ending. Chapter 16: The Warm World and Its Rhythms. The Cretaceous climate was warmer than our own, not uncomfortable, not burning, but steadily, persistently warmer. There were no ice caps at the poles. The Arctic and Antarctic were forested, or at least vegetated regions with cold winters, but not the permanent ice sheets they carry today. The global average temperature was perhaps 6 to 10 degrees Celsius higher than the modern average. This warmth had effects that spread through every part of the world's systems. The oceans were warmer, which meant they could hold slightly less dissolved oxygen than cool water does. There were periods in the Cretaceous, called oceanic anoxic events, when large parts of the deep ocean became depleted of oxygen, creating dead zones where very little could survive. The organic matter that sank into these oxygen-poor waters did not decay in the normal way, but was preserved in the sediment. Over millions of years, under heat and pressure, that organic material was transformed into something else. There is petroleum, oil. Much of the oil that the modern world runs on, that we extract from wells and refine into fuel, is the compressed and transformed remains of marine organisms that lived and died in the Cretaceous oceans. When you fill a car with petrol, or when a plane takes off into the sky, it is in a quiet and indirect way running on the Cretaceous, on the sunlight that those ancient sea creatures captured and stored in their bodies long before the first human being existed. There is something quietly astonishing about that. The past is not as separate from us as we think. It is in our fuels and our limestone buildings and our chalk and our oil. It is in the birds outside our windows and in the crocodiles in their warm rivers. It is in the very oxygen we breathe. Produced by billions of years of photosynthesis by plants and algae that are themselves the descendants of Mesozoic ancestors. We are, in a way, living inside the long consequences of everything that came before, and the Mesozoic world is one of the deepest and most significant of those long consequences. Let that rest with you softly. The deep connection, the long thread, the world that existed long before us made the world we came into. And what we do with our world will shape whatever comes after us, long after our own brief, bright chapter is finished. This is not a heavy thought for tonight. It is, I hope, a gentle one. A reminder that nothing exists alone. Everything is part of a long, slow, continuous story. And right now, your part in that story is to rest, to be still, to breathe. Let the Cretaceous world move around you in the dark, warm and ancient and full of strange life. The mosasaurs are turning in the warm sea. The Parasaurolophus is calling its long, low note across the forest. Quetzalcoatlus is riding a thermal high above the plains, wings barely moving, its shadow moving slowly across the ground far below. And you are here, in the dark, in your own time, resting inside the story of all of it. The world turns slowly, and so do we. We're almost ready to move into the final chapters of the Mesozoic, but not yet. For now, just drift. Let the warm Cretaceous air settle around you. Let the ancient sounds play softly at the edges of your mind. You are safe, you are resting. And the story, as always, continues. Chapter 17. The world growing quieter. Something has shifted. You may not be able to name it exactly, but if you have been with me since the beginning of tonight, travelling through the dry Triassic plains and the golden Jurassic forests, and into the warm, flowering world of the Cretaceous, then perhaps you can feel it somewhere in the way this story is breathing. We are moving into the later hours now, not just of the night, but of the era itself. The Cretaceous is still full and alive and rich beyond imagining. The dinosaurs are still walking. The seas are still warm. The flowers are still opening each morning in the soft Cretaceous light. Nothing dramatic has happened yet. Nothing sharp or sudden. But there is a feeling, if you sit very still and listen for it, that the story is slowly, gently beginning to gather itself towards something. That feeling is not fear. I want to be clear about that. It is something more like the feeling of late afternoon, when the light has begun to lean sideways and turn golden, and you know the day is not over, but you can feel the evening waiting patiently just behind the horizon. That is the feeling of the late Cretaceous, and it is, in its own quiet way, one of the most beautiful feelings in the whole long story of this planet. So let us walk through it together, slowly, without hurry, the way you walk through the last hour of a perfect day when you want to hold every moment a little longer than usual. Take a slow breath with me. Feel the air move in, cool and quiet. Feel it move out, warm and easy. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 18. The Forests at the Edge of Forever. By the late Cretaceous, thus, the forests of the world were unlike anything that had existed before them. For the first time in Earth's long history, flowers were everywhere, not just scattered at the edges of rivers or hiding in forest clearings, everywhere, woven through the dark conifer forests, and spreading across open floodplains and climbing into the high canopy and creeping along the rocky ground near mountain streams. The world smelled different now. In the Jurassic, the dominant smells of the land were the deep resinous smell of conifers and the green, slightly sharp smell of ferns and the damp earthiness of moss and wet soil. Good smells, ancient smells. But by the late Cretaceous, layered over all of that was something sweeter, something more varied. The smells of pollen and nectar and the particular perfume of individual flowers, like each one slightly different from the next, each one aimed at a specific pollinator, calling to it across the warm air like a quiet chemical invitation. The insects had responded to this invitation with extraordinary enthusiasm. Beetles had diversified enormously, becoming one of the most species-rich groups of animals on Earth, a status they still hold today. More than a third of all known animal species are beetles. The late Cretaceous was already well on its way toward this extraordinary abundance of beetle life. Bees, or their close ancestors, were moving between flowers. Wasps and moths and early butterflies were part of the air's constant layered movement. And with the insects came more birds. The birds of the late Cretaceous were far more diverse and accomplished than Archaeopteryx had been. They had lost their teeth in many lineages. Their tails had shortened into the compact fan-tailed arrangement we know today. Their feet had become specialized for perching, for wading, for swimming, for climbing. They filled the forest with sound, not the deep resonant calls of the large dinosaurs, though those were still present too, but something lighter, higher, more complex, the layered quicksilver sound of birds calling across a morning forest. If you had stood in a late Cretaceous forest at dawn, closed your eyes, and listened only to the bird song, you might have felt just for a moment that you were somewhere familiar, somewhere not entirely unlike a forest morning in our own time, because in that sound the modern world was already forming, already singing its first quiet notes. Imagine that. Standing in a world 68 million years old and hearing something that sounds almost like home. Let that image settle into you softly. The song of something ancient, becoming something familiar. The long bridge between then and now, made of feathers and air and sound. For a moment, Just breathe. Chapter 19. The Small Ones Who Waited. I want to talk about the mammals again, because I think they deserve more than a passing mention. They were there for all of it. Every chapter of the Mesozoic, every era we have visited tonight, through the Triassic and the Jurassic and the full long arc of the Cretaceous, the mammals were there, small and quiet and mostly unseen, living in the cracks and shadows of a world that belonged to the giants. They did not fight their way through. They did not compete directly with the dinosaurs for the large ecological roles. They simply found the spaces that were available and filled them completely. The night was theirs. The deep burrows were theirs. The roots and the undergrowth and the dark spaces under logs and inside hollow trees. These were mammal territories, small kingdoms of warmth and smell and quick heartbeats, invisible to the great lumbering world above, and they were extraordinarily good at being what they were. Their warm blood kept them active in conditions that would have slowed a cold-blooded animal to stillness. Their sensitive noses read the night air with a complexity that we can barely imagine. Their ears caught frequencies that the larger animals around them may never have registered. They nursed their young, fed them with their own bodies. This is such a familiar thing to us, so deeply embedded in our own nature, that it is easy to forget what a remarkable evolutionary innovation it is. To produce food for your offspring from your own body, to keep them warm with your own warmth, to carry them or stay near them until they are capable of surviving on their own. This investment in each individual offspring, this careful, close, warm nurturing, produces animals that are better prepared for the complexity of the world they enter. It is a slower strategy than producing hundreds of eggs and leaving them to chance. But in the long run, across millions of years of changing conditions, it proved to be one of the most successful strategies life has ever found. And in the late Cretaceous, the mammals were still practicing it, still nursing their small, bright-eyed, quick-hearted young in the dark and the warmth, still waiting without knowing they were waiting for a world that would finally have room for them. Picture one of them now, a small creature, perhaps the size of a mouse, curled in a burrow in the soft earth of a Cretaceous riverbank. Outside it is warm and bright. The birds are calling. Somewhere far away the ground trembles faintly with the footsteps of something enormous. But inside the burrow it is cool and dark and very still. The small mammal is sleeping. Its heartbeat is rapid but steady, a soft, constant warmth at the center of its small chest. It is not thinking about the future. It does not know what is coming. It only knows the darkness and the coolness of the earth around it and the particular deep comfort of being safe and still. And in that small, curled, sleeping body, everything is waiting. All of us, everything we are, every human being who has ever lived or will ever live, waiting inside that small, warm heartbeat in the Cretaceous dark. Is there anything more quietly extraordinary than that? For a moment, just breathe. Let that thought move through you gently. You're connected to something very old, and that old thing is resting right now as you rest. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 20, on slowness and deep time. I want to stay still with you for a little while, not moving forward, not adding new facts or new creatures or new landscapes, just being here, together, in the quiet. Because one of the things this story is really about, underneath all the dinosaurs and the ancient seas and the flowering forests, is time itself. The quality of deep time. The way certain kinds of vastness, when you really let them in, do something unexpected to the feeling inside your chest. They make it quieter. When you truly sit with the fact that the Mesozoic lasted 186 million years, and that the whole of recorded human history is less than 5,000 years, and that 5,000 years compared to 186 million years is like a single second in a week. Something in the mind loosens a little. The grip relaxes. The things that feel urgent begin to feel, not less real, but differently sized, properly sized. We live in a world that moves very fast and asks us to keep up with it, to be alert to every notification, every piece of news, every shift in the social weather around us, to always be doing, always be responding, always be somewhere in our minds even when our bodies are still. But the sauropod didn't live this way. It moved through the Jurassic at the pace that suited its body and its world. It ate when it was hungry. It rested when it was tired. It moved with the seasons and the rains and the slow availability of food across a vast landscape. It was not behind on anything. It had nowhere to be but exactly where it was. And it did this for 150 million years. There is a kind of wisdom in that, I think. Not a wisdom we can take directly and apply to our complicated modern lives, but a kind of distant, gentle reminder that slowness has always been part of life, that rest is not laziness, that being exactly where you are, without reaching for the next thing, is one of the oldest and most natural states available to a living creature. You're doing that right now. You're being exactly where you are, in the dark, in the quiet, in the slow, easy rhythm of a body that is resting, and that is enough. It has always been enough. Chapter 21. The Cooling of the World. The late Cretaceous world was beginning very slowly to change its temperature. The extraordinary warmth of the peak, Cretaceous, that long, stable greenhouse world without polar ice, was gradually giving way to something slightly cooler. Degree by degree, over millions of years, the climate was shifting. The shallow inland seas were retreating. The western interior seaway that had split North America for tens of millions of years was slowly shrinking, its waters pulling back, the land rising gently where the sea had been. New landscapes were appearing, floodplains where there had been sea floor, river systems finding new paths through lowlands that had never been land before, forests spreading into regions that had recently been underwater. These changes were slow enough that no individual animal experienced them as change. Each generation was born into a world that seemed stable and complete. Each generation lived its full life without ever knowing that the world it inhabited was different from the world its great-great-grandparents had inhabited. This is how deep change works. It does not announce itself. It does not ask permission. It simply accumulates quietly in the background of all the ordinary days, until the ordinary days themselves are different. In some regions, the diversity of dinosaurs was shifting. Some lineages that had been very successful earlier in the Cretaceous were less common now. Others were thriving. Tyrannosaurus rex, which appeared in the very last few million years of the Cretaceous, was in some ways a product of these changing conditions. The retreating seaway and changing landscapes of Western North America created new ecological pressures and new opportunities, and Tyrannosaurus, with its extraordinary senses and its bone-crushing bite, filled the apex predator role with remarkable efficiency. It was, in its time and place, perfect. Not perfect in the sense of flawless. Every animal has its constraints and its vulnerabilities, but perfect in the sense of being completely fitted to its world. They a thing shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure into something that worked, completely and powerfully, within the conditions it inhabited. That is a kind of perfection worth pausing over. Not the perfection of a designed object, engineered with a specific purpose in mind, but the deeper, stranger, more humbling perfection of something that simply became exactly what its world needed it to be, through the long, slow, blind process of life testing itself against reality, generation after generation, for millions of years. All living things have this kind of perfection. You have it too. You're exactly what 4 billion years of a life on Earth has been building toward, in one of its countless directions. Your eyes, your hands, your warm blood, your dreaming brain, and your ability to lie in the dark and listen to a quiet voice telling you a story about ancient creatures. All of it is the product of that same long, patient process. You're not separate from the Mesozoic. You're one of its outcomes. One of the things that the long story of life was always, without knowing it, moving toward. Let that rest in you gently. You belong to this old story. You have always belonged to it. Chapter 22, The Last Perfect Morning. Let me give you one final image for this part of our journey. It is a morning in the very late Cretaceous, perhaps 66,100,000 years ago. A completely ordinary morning in every way. The sun rises over a broad river valley in what will one day be Montana. The light comes slowly, the way it always does, with you warming the tops of the conifer trees first, then spilling down through the canopy in long soft columns, reaching the forest floor in gentle patches. A small herd of Edmontosaurus, a large hadrosaur, is gathered at a river crossing. Their bodies are massive and dark in the early light, their duck-like bills sweeping low over the vegetation at the water's edge. A juvenile stays close to its mother, half hidden under the curve of her body. Across the river, a pair of Ankylosaurus are feeding in the open, their armoured backs catching the first warm light, the bony plates gleaming faintly. They move with that particular low, deliberate patience that seems built into their very design. Nothing rushes an Ankylosaurus. Nothing ever has. In the trees, birds are already calling, quick complex songs layering over each other in the warming air. And high above all of it, a pterosaur is riding an early thermal, wings spread wide, tilting slightly in the breeze, watching the river valley below with calm, ancient eyes. The river sounds clear and steady. The flowers along its bank are opening in the morning light, small and bright, white and yellow, and the softest possible pink. A bee moves between them. The world is complete, fully, perfectly, quietly complete. Not because nothing will ever change. Everything will change. Everything always does. But because right now, in this one soft morning 66 million years ago, everything that exists is exactly and completely what it is. The armoured dinosaurs are armoured, the birds are singing, the bee is in the flowers, the river is running clear, and the sun is rising. The way it has risen every single morning for 4.5 billion years, without exception, without failure, without ever once not arriving. That is the deepest comfort I know. The sun always rises, and there is always a morning on the other side of the dark. Let that thought be the last soft thing you carry into sleep tonight. The sun always rises, on the Cretaceous River Valley, on the Jurassic Forest, on every morning this old planet has ever had, and on yours tomorrow. Rest now. Let the ancient world breathe quietly around you. Let the river sound be whatever sounds are near you now. Let the morning that is coming take care of itself. You are safe. You are warm. Chapter 23. The beginning of the ending. We are nearly there now, not at the end of the night. The night is still soft and dark and holding you gently wherever you are. But we are approaching the end of this particular story, the end of the Mesozoic, the final pages of a chapter that lasted 186 million years. I want to move through it carefully, not quickly, not dramatically, because even endings, when they are this old and this vast, deserve to be held with tenderness. So stay with me a little longer. Let your breathing be slow and easy. Let the darkness around you be comfortable and safe. And let me tell you, as gently as I can, how the age of dinosaurs came to its close. The date was approximately 66 million years ago. The place was somewhere in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, And what happened was this. A rock fell from the sky. Not a small rock. Not a stone you could hold in your hand or even lift with both arms. A rock roughly 10 to 15 kilometers across. An asteroid, travelling at something like 20 kilometers per second, which is faster than any human mind can really picture. It hit the Earth with a force so enormous that scientists estimate it released energy roughly 10 billion times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. In an instant, an enormous crater was blasted into the rock. The surrounding land was vaporized. A wave of superheated gas and debris spread outward at incredible speed. In the immediate region, everything ended in moments, but the effect spread much further than the immediate blast. Enormous quantities of dust and debris were thrown high into the atmosphere. The sulfur from the rocks that were vaporized combined with water vapor to form sulfuric acid droplets. Soot from the wildfires that erupted across wide regions of the planet added to the thickening cloud. The sky went dark. Across most of the Earth, the sunlight that plants needed to grow was blocked. Not forever, but for long enough. Months, perhaps years of dimness and cold. Temperatures dropped sharply. Plants struggled and died. And when the plants died, the animals that depended on plants struggled too. And when the herbivores weakened, the predators that depended on them weakened as well. The food chains collapsed, layer by layer, from the bottom up. And the non-avian dinosaurs, those great, magnificent, extraordinary animals that had walked the Earth for 165 million years, could not survive it. They were gone. Within a geologically brief period after the impact, perhaps tens of thousands of years, perhaps a little longer, the last of them had disappeared. The Mesozoic Era was over. I want to sit with that for just a moment. Not in grief, exactly. Because grief requires closeness, and these creatures lived 66 million years ago. But in something quieter than grief, something more like the feeling you get at the end of a very long, very beautiful book, when you close the cover and sit in the stillness for a moment before the ordinary world comes back in. The dinosaurs had their time, their full, complete, magnificent time, and what a time it was. Chapter 24. What survived? But this is not only a story of ending, because something survived. Many things survived. The small mammals in their burrows, the birds in their trees and cliffs, the crocodilians in their rivers, the turtles in their ponds, the snakes and lizards in their crevices, the fish in the deep ocean, below the chaos at the surface, the insects in their countless millions, adapted to survive on almost nothing. Life, as it has always done, found the cracks, and from those cracks, it came back. The first years after the impact were hard and cold and dim. The food was scarce. Many more species went extinct in that long, dark aftermath than were killed directly by the impact itself. The world was emptied of much of its former richness. But emptiness, in the story of life, is always an invitation. The mammals came out of their burrows. They found a world stripped of its giant competitors. A world with open ecological roles that had been occupied by enormous animals for 165 million years, now suddenly vacant. And the mammals, those small, warm, adaptable, quick-breeding, nurturing creatures who had been practicing survival in the margins for all that time, began to fill them. Not overnight, not in a generation or a century, but over millions of years the mammals diversified with extraordinary speed. They grew larger. They moved into every environment. They took to the trees and to the seas and to the open plains. They became horses and whales and bats and elephants and primates. And the primates, after many more millions of years, became us. Every human being who has ever lived is the great-great-grand descendant uncountable generations removed of a small, warm, frightened, resilient creature that survived the end of the Mesozoic in a burrow in the dark. We are the inheritors of that survival. We are what the long Mesozoic story was without knowing it, also building toward. There is something deeply moving about that, if you let yourself feel it. You're here because something small and warm survived an ending that seemed total. You're here because life does not stop, not for ice ages, not for volcanic catastrophes, not for asteroids. It finds the cracks. It comes back. It diversifies. It fills the world again with new shapes and new sounds and new ways of being alive. And eventually, impossibly, it produces something that can lie in the dark and listen to the story of its own origins and feel something about it. Something like wonder, something like gratitude, something like the quiet, as bone-deep comfort of knowing that you come from a very long line of survivors. For a moment, just breathe, feel that. You come from a very long line of survivors. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 25. The legacy that never left. The Mesozoic did not vanish completely. It left things behind. Everywhere, if you know how to look. The birds outside your window in the morning are the living descendants of theropod dinosaurs. Every sparrow and crow and pigeon and hawk and tiny winter wren is carrying in its bones and its feathers and its warm, quick blood the deep legacy of the Mesozoic. When a bird opens its beak and sings, it is doing something that has roots going back 150 million years. The crocodilians, the alligators and crocodiles still living in warm rivers and swamps around the world are almost unchanged from their Mesozoic ancestors. Their body plan, their patient stillness, their extraordinary bite, all of it was perfected in the Triassic and the Jurassic and has not needed significant revision since. They are, in a very real sense, living fossils. Ancient things that found a design so effective that time simply had no reason to change them. The turtles are ancient too. Turtles have been on this earth for more than 200 million years, before the peak of the dinosaurs through the whole, long Mesozoic, and all the way to the present day. When you see a turtle moving slowly through a garden or a pond, you're looking at something older than any dinosaur. Something that watched the giants come and go and simply continued its slow, patient existence. The insects, the ferns, the cycads, is still growing in tropical gardens around the world, their strange, stiff leaves exactly as they were in the Jurassic. The horseshoe crabs on their ancient beaches, the sharks in their ocean depths, barely changed for hundreds of millions of years. The Mesozoic is not gone. It is all around us, hiding in plain sight, in the bodies and behaviours of creatures that survived and adapted and continued. And it is in us too. The warm blood in our veins, first developed in our mammal ancestors in the Triassic. The precise, complex hearing that mammals evolved partly for navigating Mesozoic nights. The large, expressive eyes of primates evolved in ancestors that moved through forest canopies long after the dinosaurs were gone, but using visual systems with deep ancient roots. We are built in part from Mesozoic solutions to Mesozoic problems. We are, all of us, children of that old world. Let that be a soft and grounding thought as you drift towards sleep. You are ancient. Your body carries the wisdom of billions of years of life finding its way. And right now, that ancient body knows exactly what to do. It is breathing. It is resting. It is letting go. Chapter 26. The Long River. I want to give you one last image before we close tonight. Imagine a river. Not any specific river. Just the idea of a river, wide and slow and brown in the late afternoon light. Moving through a flat landscape, its banks lined with trees, its surface reflecting the sky in long rippling pieces. This river has been here for a very long time. It was here in some form before the dinosaurs. It changed shape across the Mesozoic, carved new channels, flooded into different lowlands, shifted its course over millions of years. It was different in the Jurassic from how it was in the Cretaceous, different in the Cretaceous from how it is now, but it has always been here. Always moving, always finding the low places, always carrying whatever the land gives it, sediment and leaves and the fallen things of every era down toward the sea. The sauropods drank from it. The Triceratops herds crossed it in the early morning light. The small mammals crouched at its edge in the Cretaceous dark. And now, after all of that, after all those millions of years and all those vanished creatures, it is still here, still moving, still carrying the world's material toward the sea, still reflecting the sky. That river is time itself, I think, always moving, never the same water twice, but always, recognizably, itself. And we're all somewhere along its banks. The dinosaurs were here for their long, magnificent chapter. The flowers and the insects and the birds and the small warm mammals have all been here, each in their own time and their own way. And you are here now, on the bank of the same long river, in your own particular evening, in your own particular dark, listening to a voice that is telling you a story about the water that passed long before you arrived. And after us, the river will keep moving. It'll carry other things, in other times, in other forms we cannot imagine. And all of it, every drop of it, is part of the same long flowing, the same patient, ancient, beautiful story. You are part of that story. You have always been part of it. And right now, your part in it is this. Just this. The dark, the quiet, the slow. Alren, warm settling of a body at rest. Chapter 27. Fading slowly into sleep. We're almost at the end now. Not because the story is finished. The story of life on Earth is nowhere near finished. It will go on for billions of years more, through changes we cannot imagine, in forms that have not yet been dreamed of. But this chapter, tonight's chapter, is drawing to its quiet close, and I want to do that slowly, very slowly, like the light fading from a sky after sunset, so gradually that you cannot point to the moment it became night. If you have been listening since the beginning, you have travelled a long way tonight. You were there at the end of the Permian, when the world was emptied and waiting. You walk through the dry, arid Triassic plains when Pangaea was still whole and the first dinosaurs were still small and tentative. You stood in the Jurassic forest and felt the ground tremble under the footsteps of the greatest land animals this planet has ever carried. You looked out over the warm Cretaceous sea and watched the mosasaurs move below the surface. You heard the flowers opening. You heard the birds beginning to sing. You saw the small, warm mammal curled in its burrow, heartbeat rapid, eyes closed, waiting without knowing it was waiting. And you were there, in a quiet way, for the ending of that great era and the beginning of the long road that led through millions of more years, all the way to you. You did all of that tonight, while lying still, while breathing slowly, while the world outside your window went about its ordinary, modern business, entirely unaware of how ancient the ground beneath it is. That is one of the quiet gifts of stories like this one. They give you back the deep time that our busy modern lives tend to compress into nothing. They remind you that the ground beneath you is very old, that the air you breathe has been breathed by extraordinary things, that the darkness you are resting in is the same darkness the first mammals rested in, all those millions of years ago, small and warm and safe in their burrows while the world moved around them. You are safe too. You are warm. You're resting in the same old dark that has held every living thing that has ever needed rest. For a moment, just breathe. Let your body be completely heavy now. Let your thoughts, if there are any left, be soft and slow and shapeless. Let the ancient world turn quietly around you, the way it always has, the way it always will. You do not need to hold on to any of it. Not the names, not the numbers, not the images of sauropods in morning light, or ammonites spiralling through warm green water. Let it all go. Let it drift away like sediment settling slowly to the bottom of a quiet sea. The story will still be here. The fossils will still be in the rock. The birds will still be singing in the morning, carrying their Mesozoic legacy in every feather and every note. And the sun, that same ancient sun that warmed the Jurassic forests and glittered on the Cretaceous seas and rose each morning over the great herds of the late Cretaceous plains, that sun will rise again tomorrow. It always does, it always has. Chapter 28. Good night. Thank you for travelling with me tonight. Thank you for giving this story your quiet attention, or even just your resting presence. You did not need to understand every word or remember every name. You only needed to be here, in the dark, letting the ancient world move through you at whatever pace felt right. That is enough. That has always been enough. The Mesozoic was here. It was vast and warm and full of things beyond imagining. It lasted longer than we can really feel, and it passed. The way all things pass, slowly and completely and without leaving anything behind that did not deserve to continue. The birds are its continuation. The flowers are its continuation. The warm blood in your chest is its continuation. You are, in your own quiet way, the continuation of everything that came before you. And tonight, your continuation looks like this. Like rest. Like stillness. Like the slow, soft rhythm of a body that has done enough for one day and is ready finally to let go. So let go now. Let the thoughts become softer. Let the images from tonight, the fern forests and the great necks rising above the canopy, and the spiralling ammonites and the small mammal in its dark burrow, let them all become gentle and distant, like the memory of a dream you had a long time ago. Let the darkness be comfortable. Let the quiet be complete. You are resting on the same ancient earth that held all of those extraordinary lives, the same ground, the same air, the same darkness between the stars, and somewhere deep in the rock beneath you the fossils are still there, patient and perfect and undisturbed, still carrying the shapes of things that lived and breathed and moved through an ancient world, still waiting the way all the past waits, quietly inside the present, just beneath the surface of everything. The world turns slowly, and so do we. And yet, before the darkness takes you completely, let me linger here with you just a little longer, because there is something about endings that deserves more than a single quiet sentence. Endings are not simple things. They're not walls. They're not doors slamming shut in an empty hallway. They're more like the shoreline where a tide goes out, slowly retreating across the sand in a long, soft curve, leaving behind it the wet shine of everything it carried, the shells and the smooth stones and the dark lines of seaweed, all of it arranged by the water into something that looks, if you stand back far enough, almost like a kind of writing. The Mesozoic left behind that kind of writing. It is written in the rock layers of every continent, in the chalk cliffs of England and the red sandstone of the American Southwest, and the limestone quarries of Germany and the ancient riverbeds of Patagonia. It is written in the fossils that sleep inside those rocks, patient and precise, holding their shapes across millions of years with a fidelity that no human archive has ever matched. It is written in the bodies of living things, in the skeleton of a bird which carries the hollow bones and the wishbone, and the arrangement of the fingers that first appeared in small Jurassic theropods, running through the undergrowth with quick, alert eyes. In the armour of a crocodile lying still in a warm river, waiting with the same patient genius it has used for 200 million years. In the layered, slow intelligence of a turtle, pulling itself up onto a sun-warmed rock, blinking in the afternoon light, indifferent to the 66 million years that have passed since the world it was born into disappeared. These creatures do not know they are ancient. They do not carry the weight of their own history. They simply are what they are, completely and without apology, the way all living things are what they are when the world lets them be. And you're ancient too in your own way, not as old as the crocodile's design, not as continuous as the turtle's patience, but ancient in the way that all life is ancient. Yes, connected backward through an unbroken chain of living things to the very first cells that formed in the warm, shallow water of an early Earth, billions of years before the Mesozoic ever began. Every cell in your body is the direct descendant of those first cells, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. The thread of life that runs from those first tiny living things to you, right now, lying in the dark, has never once been broken. Not by the Great Dying, not by the asteroid at the end of the Cretaceous, not by any of the other catastrophes and extinctions and upheavals that punctuate the long story of this planet. Every single one of your ancestors, all the way back to the very beginning, survived. Every one of them lived long enough to pass something forward. Every one of them. From the first single-celled thing floating in a Precambrian sea, to the small Triassic mammal in its burrow, to the primate in its forest, to the first human being who ever looked up at the night sky and wondered about something, every single one of them made it through whatever their world threw at them. And here you are, the latest link in an unbroken chain of survival that stretches back nearly 4 billion years. There is nothing small about that. There is nothing ordinary about that. Even on the nights when everything feels ordinary, even on the nights when the day was difficult and the world felt heavy, and you came to bed tired and a little worn, even then, you're carrying something extraordinary. You are the living continuation of the longest story ever told. Let your eyes be fully closed now. Let your hands be still. Let your jaw soften, your shoulders drop, the last little tensions in your body release the way a fist slowly opens in sleep, finger by finger, until the hand is open and loose and resting. There is nothing to hold on to tonight, nothing that needs holding. The world is turning slowly the way it always turns, carrying you along with it in its patient ancient rotation, one more living thing on its surface, resting in the dark, breathing in the air that billions of years of life have made breathable. Think about that just for a moment. The oxygen in every breath you take was made by living things, by ancient algae in Precambrian oceans, by the great forests of the Carboniferous, by every leaf that has ever turned sunlight into sugar and released oxygen as a quiet, generous byproduct, by the Mesozoic forests themselves, by the ferns and the cycads and the flowering plants of the Cretaceous, adding their breath to the long accumulation of breathable air. Every breath you take is a gift from every living thing that ever photosynthesized. The ancient world is still feeding you, still breathing with you, still holding you up. You're never as alone in the dark as the dark sometimes suggests. You're surrounded, invisibly, by the long legacy of everything that came before. The Triassic is in the rock beneath your feet. The Jurassic is in the feathers of the birds that will sing tomorrow morning. The Cretaceous is in the flowers that will open in the light. And the small, warm mammal who survived the ending of all that, who came out of its burrow into a changed world and simply kept going, kept breathing, kept finding food, kept nursing its young, kept being warm and alive and persistent in the way that life always is, that small creature is in you. Its heartbeat became your heartbeat. Its warmth became your warmth. Its long survival became your existence. So when you wake tomorrow, if you remember any part of this night's journey, let it be that. Let it be the feeling of deep connection, the quiet knowing that you are not new here, that life on this planet knows you in its ancient wordless way because you are made of it. You are the Mesozoic, still going. You are the long river, still flowing. You are the morning, still arriving. But right now, you are the night. You are the stillness. You are the slow, deep, necessary rest that all living things have always needed and always found. The sauropods rested in the Jurassic dark. The small mammals rested in their burrows. The birds tuck their heads under their wings every single night, as they have for 150 million years, and give themselves completely to sleep. And now you, tucking yourself into the dark, giving yourself completely to rest. This is not weakness. This is not wasted time. This is one of the most ancient and necessary things a living creature can do. Sleep is the gift the body gives itself. Sleep is when the long work of being alive is quietly maintained, renewed, restored. Sleep is as old as life itself. And you are very good at it. You have always been good at it. Every ancestor you ever had was good at it. So let yourself be good at it now. Let the thoughts thin out, one by one, like stars disappearing into the dawn sky. Not gone, just no longer visible, resting behind the brightness of something else. Let the images from tonight's journey settle slowly. The fern forests, the amber Jurassic evening, the cold, clear Cretaceous river, the small, warm heartbeat in the dark burrow. Let them become distant and soft and half-formed, the way all memories become in the minutes before sleep takes them. Let the ancient world hold you the way it has always held everything that lived in it, with weight and warmth and complete indifference to the smallness of any single life, and yet somehow, in that very indifference, with a kind of absolute acceptance. The world does not judge what it holds, it simply holds it. It held the sauropods and the ammonites and the pterosaurs and the tiny mammals and the flowering plants and the singing birds and the patient turtles. And it holds you right now, in the dark, in the quiet, in the slow, ancient rhythm of a planet that has been turning since before there was anything alive to notice it turning. You are held. You are safe. You are resting in something very, very old. And that old thing knows exactly what to do with you. It will keep you warm through the night. It will carry you through the dark hours. It will bring the morning as it always does, as it has always done, without fail, for 4.5 billion years. The sun will rise tomorrow, and you will be there to see it. But that is tomorrow. Tonight is for this, for the deep, dreamful, necessary dark, for the slow breathing, for the letting go, for the ancient animal beautiful act of simply resting in the world that made you. Good night, traveller. You have come a long way tonight, from the first empty silence after the great dying, through the warm towering forests of the Jurassic, through the flowering humming richness of the Cretaceous, through the ending that was also a beginning, all the way to here, to this moment, to this breath. This is where the journey ends tonight, and it ends, as all good journeys should end, not with a door closing, but with a window opening onto something quiet and dark and full of stars. Rest now. The Mesozoic has been waiting 66 million years. It can wait a little longer while you sleep. And when morning comes and the birds begin outside your window, carrying their ancient Mesozoic songs into the new day, just listen for a moment before you rise. Listen to the sound of something that survived, something that kept going, something that is still here. Just like you. Good night. Sleep well. The world turns slowly, and so do we.